Hello, all of my rad friends, and welcome to another video. Today's video is gonna be about how to find a neutral eyeshadow palette that works for you and your skin tone, and it's particularly going to be through the lens of my journey to that, which is as a cool, muted, pale olive. But I think that the things that I talk about in this video are going to be pretty universally applicable, like the color theory and things like that. So even if you're not a pale, cool, and muted olive, I think that there are still a lot of things you can get out of this video. First, I'm going to be going into color theory because I think that's really important as a basis for understanding the makeup. But if you want to skip right to the makeup, I'm going to be putting the time in the description box. Survey says that is a lie. Sorry guys to jump in here, but Filming Lexi thought she was going to make one video about color analysis and finding a neutral color palette, and turns out that's a really long video. So today's video is going to be just talking about color theory, and then the next video is going to actually be finding a neutral or your neutral eyeshadow palette. Sorry guys. So let's talk about the color theory. I want to preface this by saying this is the way that I think about color theory. At the end of the day, color is kind of like a thing that our brains make up. It's just, you know, wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum. So there are a lot of different ways that we talk about color theory from a perspective of physics, from the perspective of artists, and from the perspective of the makeup industry, which, like, spoiler alert,
everything the makeup industry tells you about color is pretty much bullshit.
It took me a lot of time to like personally integrate these kind of disparate color systems into one sort of like theory or way of thinking about it in my own head so that I could make sense of like this whole thing and like color matching and all of that. But there are probably going to be people saying like, that's wrong, that's not right, or whatever, but it's just the way that I think about it that I have found incredibly helpful. So I just want to kind of share that with you guys. So let's get to the color theory. To start out, most of us are really familiar with the red, yellow, blue, or the primary colors, but like if you know anything about printer toner, you'll know that the actual primary colors are yellow, magenta, and cyan. I think that we simplify those to red, yellow, and blue because it's like easier to teach to children. The problem is that if you use red, yellow, and blue, your secondary colors are going to be purple, orange, and green. But if you use cyan, magenta, and yellow, your secondary colors are going to be red, green, and blue. Yellow plus magenta equals red. Yellow plus cyan equals green. And magenta and cyan equals blue. And so that means our secondary colors are actually red, green, and blue. And why that's important is because red, green, and blue are actually the primary colors as we define them when it comes to frequencies of light. That's what our eyes are tuned to see. We see the world as mostly mixtures of red, green, and blue. And any color that you can think of can be expressed that way. I think that if you are someone who deals with olive skin, seeing the colors as a combination of red, green, and blue can really make sense, because if you're someone who needs more green in your cosmetics or less green in your cosmetics, you're talking about a color scale where you can see the effects of that and not talking about yellow and blue or yellow and cyan. The important distinction between these two color theories is that if you're talking about red, yellow, blue, or like yellow, magenta, cyan, when you add all those colors together, it equals black. And when you have no color, it's white. But red, green, and blue color theory is based on light. So all of those colors together equals white, and an absence of all of those colors equals black. And I think that that causes a lot of confusion because how our eyes perceive colors is red, green, blue, but how we talk about them and how we think about them, especially in makeup and art and painting, is based on yellow, red, blue, or yellow, magenta, cyan. And if we think about it from an art perspective, that means that we have things like tints, which is adding white to make something pastel, shades, which is adding black that we often called like a deepened shade, or adding tones, which means adding gray or, you know, white and black, which is oftentimes what we mean when we say muted. And sometimes we even hear the phrase grungy, which can mean adding gray, but I have also seen it to mean like adding brown to a color. What complicates things even more is that when we talk about clothing, we talk about the color wheel as divided in half. We've got the cool colors and the warm colors, But a lot of times when we talk about makeup, we talk about colors individually, as in this is a warm red or a cool red. This is a warm yellow or a cool yellow. So those are two kind of different ways to approach color temperatures. And I think that when you're talking about clothes, that makes a lot of sense. But when you're talking about things like eyeshadow, blush, bronzer, foundation, things that are designed to be rubbed into the skin, I think it's more important to approach it from every individual color can have different undertones. It can be cool or warm rather than just all blues are cool and all oranges are warm. So this makes things really complicated. We've basically identified several different ways that we talk about colors. So now I'm going to pull up an RGB shade finder and we're going to kind of demonstrate some of these ideas. So here we've got this red, green, blue shade finder. Now remember, this is talking about frequencies of light. So while this is how our eyes are going to perceive the color balance, if we have more color in makeup, it's going to make it darker. Whereas here you can see it makes it lighter, and the darker is like an absence. So as I'm playing with these colors, if it gets lighter or darker, just remember that with pigment, it's gonna be the opposite. And then the makeup companies adjust that by adding like white or black or gray or whatever to make it lighter. So you can see here objectively that most of the skin tones that we see are on the orange spectrum. We are all shades of orange. So if we were thinking about this purely as cool or warm colors, then we would all be warm, right? But we're not. We're talking about undertones. And when we talk about undertones and having yellow or olive or cool skin, we aren't saying that you have green or blue skin, obviously. What we're saying is that given a base color of this tone of orange, how are you deviating from that? Are you slightly greener? Are you slightly bluer? Are you slightly pinker? And since there's no set standard base color from which we deviate, or we can define a point from which we deviate, either cooler or warmer or greener or yellow, that means that whatever the makeup company perceives as neutral or as the standard color is going to vary between makeup companies. That's how you can get a neutral foundation and have it be pretty pink or pretty orange, because that's what the company arbitrarily decided is their neutral point. But what is neutral, right? I think whatever color skin you're used to seeing, your eyes are used to seeing, is what your brain is going to define as neutral. And then from there, you will say, oh, that person looks cooler or that person looks warmer. So now I'm going to play with the colors here to demonstrate what we mean by cool and warm olive, because that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. I'm going to start with a lighter base color just because I think it's a little bit easier to see shifts of undertone against a lighter color. But all of these same things are true if you were to start from a deeper place. You can be more green, more blue, more red. So I'm going to start this with a base value of red. We all have red in our skin, you know, just like you see, this is all shades of orange. We all have red in our skin because it's from our blood showing through. And I'm going to try to get this to be something a little bit more convincing as like a real skin tone. So yeah, let's set red 35 and green 200. And we'll say this is our starting color. And we'll just make this an even number to make it easier. So we say this is our starting color. We're a makeup company and we've decided that this is our neutral color. So now we say we want it cooler. So we add a little bit more blue and we say, let's go up to 190. And you can see the color is pinker. This is why makeup companies, when they say a foundation is cooler, what they really mean is that it's pinker. Let's say we want it warmer. So now we put in less blue. And now we see this is a more of a golden undertone or a peach undertone. But we can also vary the green. And that is something that a lot of makeup companies don't bother to do. They just vary the blue. So let's go back to our neutral color. Now let's up the green. If we up the amount of green, let's say that we've decided that that is our base color. From there, you can still be cooler. I can bring, whoa, not that much. I can bring the blue up to 200. So this would be a cool shade. If you were first basing it on that original base color we picked, you might call this a cool olive. If you were starting from the second base color we picked, which was this, you would just call that cool. So it really depends on, you know, your perspective. So let's say that's a cool olive. Now we could go down and to here, and we could say that's a warmer olive. I don't necessarily think that that's a realistic skin tone, but you get the idea. The actual variation is probably closer to just very small amounts of pigment. And let's go back to that original base color. Let's say we want to do less green. Let's tone down the blue because all these colors balance out. We have to, when we adjust one, we have to kind of adjust the others. So now you can see that this is a peachier color. And from this base peachier color, we can also be cooler and warmer. We can go up to 170, and that would be a cool peach. Or we can go down to, let's say, 155, and that would be a warmer peach. So as I said before, when you're adding all these colors together, we're getting lighter. But just remember that in makeup, it would be opposite. As we're adding more pigment, it would start to get darker. And as we were taking away pigment, it would be lighter. And that is oftentimes why green color correctors will have a white base. You're adding more pigment, so they have to counteract that with a little bit of white. But that's a delicate balance as well. If you add too much white, then you're getting into that tint territory, and you can start to get pastel colors on your face. And that could just be too pastel for some people. So what does all of this mean? It means that it's fucking complicated. And the way that we have of talking about it kind of sucks and is highly dependent on what you consider your base color. This is part of why I personally have been having a lot more success finding makeup that suits me in Korean beauty brands. And that's because for whatever reason, the Korean beauty brands consider their base color something that is more harmonious with my skin tone than the Western companies. And that's why it's really important that we have more diversity in who makes the makeup. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but most makeup brands are owned by L'Oreal and Unilever that are Western-centric brands. Adding into all of this is the fact that olive for a long time has been a euphemism for people with medium-toned skin. And you can see why, as someone who is a pale olive or someone who is a deep olive, are going to have really hard times finding makeup that suits their skin. Okay, and so now we are ready for the fun part, which is the makeup. That is where today's video ends, and stay tuned for the next part of this sort of little mini series, and that will be using these color theory ideas to find a neutral eyeshadow palette that works for you, what your neutral eyeshadow palette, or in this case, what my neutral eyeshadow palette is. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Let's go!